thanks for coming out. It's a small group. I think after Memorial Day weekend, maybe it's a little bit too much for coming out for a tech talk for that. So my name is Stacy London. I work here at ShoreTel. I head up the front-end engineering group here. John is here, part of the team. I've been working with Ember for about a year. I started at ShoreTel last June. So this talk is about the upgrading Ember. So I came in to ShoreTel and they already had they had two existing applications that were built with Ember.js, which is a front-end framework. I'll go into that a little bit more. And over the course of the last year, there's been multiple opportunities for us to upgrade the framework to the latest version to take advantage of some of the benefits of the newer versions. So that's what this talk is about. I originally called this In the Trenches with Tomster because that was the original name of their little cute logo. But this year they announced their new addition to their logo suite, Zoe, which I thought was pretty awesome. Trying to, let logos and icons represent the dev teams, which is cool. So I told you a little bit about myself. I help obviously organize this with Tony, so thanks for coming, we appreciate it. I also have helped do some teaching assistance with the Milwaukee Girl Development Group. Little shout out to that. So if you know women that are interested in tech and maybe haven't had a chance to take formal education, that's a really great organization that offers courses here to like introductory things about like introduction to HTML and CSS, that kind of thing. So they do really great things. Been doing web development for a long time. 1997 is when I first started, so I've kind of seen the evolution of things from basic beginnings of early web to the really sophisticated frameworks that we see now. And then, as I mentioned, Ember for about a year. I don't have these glasses on right now. I have a new pair of glasses. These were like my original ones, and I was like, Tomster and I are the same. We have the same glasses. That makes me feel nice. All right, so what is Ember? Ember.js, it's one of the big frameworks, just like all the other big frameworks. So Angular, React is another competitor. There's a bunch of them out there. Their tagline is it's a framework for creating ambitious web apps. That's an interesting thing. I'm very curious how they define what ambitious means. I feel like ours might be ambitious. We have some pretty complicated data situations where our APIs and our Ember data structure is, I think, fairly ambitious, which I will tell you a little bit more about. Routes, models, components, controllers, and services are kind of like the main core components. It used to be model view controller, so kind of an MVC sort of framework, and it's moving towards model components, which I think is something you're seeing a lot of the big frameworks move towards. They're all kind of converging, all sharing and stealing from each other and becoming one thing, I think. And the biggest thing is that there's common idioms and best practices. So Ember's is a very big framework, and it does a lot for you. So the learning curve is slightly steep. It's a big API surface, but it ends up doing a lot of things that you might normally have to do from scratch in some other frameworks and libraries. Convention over configuration, that's something that you'll hear quite a bit in the Ember world if you start working with this tool. And that's the idea that they're going to do a lot of things for you in the framework so that you don't have to worry about setting up scaffolding or the structure of your web app. Like, what should the folder names be? What should the naming convention be? You don't have to have those conversations because the framework itself makes that required and does it for you. So sort of it can be an advantage, can be not an advantage. It kind of depends on your perspective. Pluggable architecture, Ember's got a big add-on community. I think some of the other frameworks also have this as well. This part does, I think, stand out a little bit is the stability without stagnation. They're really good about providing you deprecation warnings and having a very clear path for their upgrade. meaning like feature X is going to come in several upgrades from now. We're going to warn you about that several versions prior so that you can start preparing and like planning for that as a team. So you don't get something that like you upgrade to the latest version, it breaks, and you're surprised. You shouldn't be surprised about anything that Ember's going to give to you. And then future standards. So Yehuda Katz is one of the co-founders of it, and he's been heavily involved in TC39, which is the committee that kind of sets the direction for JavaScript. So that to me is kind of a big thing. I feel like being a part of that committee and figuring out the future direction of the language and knowing that they're trying to focus Ember on having the framework be compatible with future standards, that feels nice. So that if they're going to push towards web components, well, web components is something that standards are being pushed towards, and you're not going to have to necessarily rewrite your app to take advantage of that stuff. So these are the components of the framework. So Ember CLI, the command line interface, that's one big piece of an Ember application. And this is something I would recommend. It's kind of the only way that you build an Ember application. So if you're starting from scratch, that you use the CLI to create your app and generate stuff using the command line interface. And it gives you a whole bunch of stuff out of the box. So like prior to Ember, I worked a lot with Backbone. And working with Backbone, a lot of these things you have to figure it out yourself. So like if I wanted a local development server that live reloaded every time I made a CSS change or I made a JavaScript change, I would have to figure out what tooling I would want to be able to do that. So maybe I use Grunt, and then I use live reload, and I string those things together. Out of the box with Ember CLI, when you create a brand new application, you get that out of the box. There's a testing framework that comes kind of baked in. You can choose to use that or not use that, but it's already there for you, so that's kind of nice. Again, it's the same kind of concept where like with Backbone, I had to figure out like which among many different JavaScript frameworks that are out there for doing unit testing do I want to pick. And then how do I automate that? How do I, there's pieces that I had to kind of pick and string together. With this, right out of the box, you have a working unit test suite, which is kind of nice. It's not without issues, all things have issues, but that does get you bootstrapped pretty quick. Same thing with generators for scaffolding. So if you're familiar with like Yeoman, those kind of scaffolders, this is doing that work for you. Dependency management, so if you're used to things like required JS, this is also going to give that to you. ES6 modules, syntax support, Babel, so a lot of that stuff's right there. So if you want to start writing ES6, the build time activities, they're built in for you so that you can start writing ES6 and it's going to transpile that for you. And then asset management, so combining, minifying, versioning, that's all built in as well. Ember Data is another big component. So Ember CLI was like the scaffolder, the thing that got your project going. Ember Data is another big component. You don't have to use it. So if you want to use Ember and not use Ember Data, that's totally up to you. For our particular application, there's fairly sophisticated. There's a lot of data. There's a lot of endpoints. And so for us, that made a lot of sense to have Ember Data help us manage all the data persistence. So this gives you persistence library, it maps your client-side models in your local data store to server-side stuff. And then at the very bottom there, so like model.save, that's kind of as simple as it is then. When you're working with front-end changes, you can say model.save, and it's going to determine whether it needs to do an AJAX post or a put, depending on whether your model has changed or it's brand new, that kind of thing. So under the covers kind of figures some stuff out for you, which is nice. So in the end, that means that you're doing a lot less like scaffolding, you're not trying to argue with your team about like, should we do camel case or something else, or how do we name our JavaScript files, or what folders should we have? You're not having those conversations because Ember's very opinionated, and your Ember app is going to start off in a particular structure with particular naming patterns, and then you can get to the business of kind of creating your business functionality without having a lot of that, which can be nice. I've worked in some really big teams, like the Backbone app that I worked on prior to coming here. It was a huge team. There's like 40 plus people on there, and everyone has very, can have strong opinions. You spend a lot of time arguing about maybe some stuff that's kind of insignificant in the end to like solving the business problems. So that can be a pro. And you can be super productive because you're just writing out business functionality all over the place and solving business problems, and your business is like, you're great, love this IT team, you're not arguing about spaces versus tabs, they're so great. Alright, so who uses Ember? This is the obligatory, like, lots of places use Ember. ShoreTel is the only company that I know that is based in Milwaukee. So actually, I was going to ask everybody here, is there anybody here that uses Ember that their company is based out of Milwaukee? Oh, nice.
Yeah.
What company do you work for?
I own a small consultancy called Intrusion. There's just 6 of us. We're based in Milwaukee, but we really don't do much business here. But we use Ember.
That seems like a smart business decision. Milwaukee's sort of affordable.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, cool. It's definitely a lot of East Coast, West Coast companies using Ember, but I think it's growing. I went to Ember conference recently, and the community seems to be growing, and people are still super excited about it. So I'm so excited about it. All right, so why you came? The actual point of this talk. I thought I'd do a little bit of an intro because I figured like there aren't a lot of companies in Milwaukee using Ember, so a little bit of base would be helpful. All right, so our Ember app. So I ran metrics on our code base, which was actually kind of fascinating. So we have 69,000 lines of code, 7,000 lines which are less, 54,000 lines of JavaScript, 8,000 lines of HTML. Just interesting. And then these bottom numbers are then like how many routes we have in models, controllers, components, and templates. So those are like kind of the core pieces of the framework. And I thought that was interesting. I should send this off to like the creators of Ember and be like, is this ambitious? is this ambitious enough? I don't know. Seems like it might be. All right, so this is our upgrade path. We started off with, at least we didn't necessarily, I don't know if we started off there, and this is when I joined a year ago. The app was at Ember 1.10, and then Ember Data was still in beta when I first started, which is interesting. And then we went to 1.13, same thing with data, and then we went just recently to 2.4. And there were some like incremental hops in there, but these are kind of like the big milestones. So Ember upgrades, they follow semantic versioning or SEMVer, breaking changes, major versions, new versions, bug fixes, dot releases, and then a 6-week release cycle. The interesting thing is that originally I think the 2.0 release was going to be a fairly possibly breaking thing with how they were structurally and architecturally changing the framework. They pulled back a little bit from that, so then the 2.0 release was really about like cleaning up deprecated code and just slimming down the code surface of the framework. So that was nice. And then like the whole front end framework world with Angular, there was a lot of controversy with Angular 1.0 and 2.0. So like I think that was maybe listening to the community and being like, don't make me rewrite my whole app, that sucks. That kind of feedback. So the long-term support release is something that's pretty new, and that's something they just introduced, and that's why we went to 2.4. So 2.4 is the first long-term support release. I like their logo and their throwback to Office Space and Lundberg. So I know some places it's really hard to upgrade frequently. I know I was just having a conversation about that and how like sometimes the business side's not very open to that kind of work because they're like more features faster. I don't care about your tech and upgrading it. So I think this helps that story a little bit where you're going to get the benefits of bug fixes and support, but you're not going to have to necessarily re-architect how you frame your application. So it gives you a little bit more time to plan that stuff, which is cool. All right, so the architecture for 1.x, I think I mentioned, yeah, that's a model view controller route. The industry as a whole is kind of converging on more of like a component route pattern, so Ember team versus that. So this is something I drew for myself to try and get my head around, like the architectural shift, where like what's really changing between all these versions. And so like routes, those still stay there, models, those stay across, you know, multiple big version jumps. But the biggest thing is really like this stuff where we had to go to 2.0 and even to go from like 1.10 to 1.13, we had to do a ton of refactoring because views disappeared. And views were used extensively to create the application. And we had to refactor everything from views to components. And there still was like this confusing moment in time when they're like, everything is just components. Controllers are going away. And like, that was huge for us because we had a lot of controllers, a lot of logic in the controllers. And that felt like kind of a big shift for 2.0. They backed away from that because in order to get rid of controllers, you have to be able to route directly to a component. And that functionality is something that's still coming. And once that arrives, then controllers can go away. But templates stay the same, and then services stay the same. Except I will say, services actually work in 2.0, and we could never get services to work quite right in 1.0. That was like a huge pain point. So that's been nice. And then, yeah, I mentioned like deprecated code, getting rid of that. The one-way data flow, data down, actions up. So this is, I think, I don't know if they had been planning it as long as React existed, but for sure, because of how popular React has gotten, I think that they were like, yeah, I think we can converge on that pattern, making sense. So newer versions, you can opt into the new way that Ember components work, where that is true. So data down, actions up, things will be encapsulated. The Glimmer rendering engine, that I think was also a reaction to React, where React was saying, we're super fast, we can do this DOM diffing, we can quickly update the screen when things are changing. So Ember is doing a ton of work on that. So the Glimmer rendering engine has some huge speed improvements, which is cool. Fast boot for progressive web apps, that's also the kind of the new thing now, is to where single page web apps for the longest time have been like legacy old web app architecture where you send a web page down, someone clicks a link, it goes to the server, it sends an entirely new web page down. That architecture then migrated to kind of a single page web app architecture where the entire thing is sent down and only data is gotten back and forth between the server. And then this new progressive web app thing is a recognition that some of the amount of time it takes for a user to see something that like makes sense, like you can interact with, you can see that the app is working, can take a little bit of time with single page web apps. So fast boot is similar to like React has this as well, and the idea is that the first page that gets sent down is the entire thing. It's HTML, it's the data, it's all in one payload, and then subsequent interactions might go and get more data and like continue working kind of traditionally as single page web apps have. So Ember has an answer to that new architecture pattern. And then this was from the EmberConf when they were just describing the speed improvements of Glimmer. So frames per second, 60 is kind of that ideal frames per second refresh where like your eye is not gonna notice the difference. And these stats can be subjective. They ran some stuff with React and so forth, but I think the idea is that Ember is going to be very competitive with React for downdiffing and painting. All right, so how do you upgrade Ember? These are some tips, I guess, that I think, these are personal recommendations based on having done some of these upgrades. To apply each upgrade incrementally, so don't jump from like 110 to 2.4, because over time, each dot release is going to give you different deprecation messages, and it's going to allow you to prepare in a different way. So if you do each one incrementally, it'll be less, by the time you get to the version that you want, it's going to be less work. So I think that's kind of important. And then I'm going to recommend that you don't run the init, which I'm going to show you, so that's kind of the live demo part of how you actually upgrade an Ember app. The last step that they'll tell you to do is run this init, which attempts to modify your existing application with all the recommended changes. I would kind of recommend not to do that and maybe just do it as like a dummy Ember app at the version that you want to go to, and then just do like file comparisons between that thing and your app, just so that nothing unexpected is happening. You're very deliberate about like what you're doing for the upgrade. All right, live demo time. Hopefully this goes smoothly. We shall see. All right, so this app that I have right here is just out-of-the-box scaffolded Ember app built with the CLI. So I've created this app from the command line interface. Everything's empty, or there's no controllers or components. But this is all the scaffolding that it gives you. And what we're going to do is run through kind of the upgrade process for this. So first I'm going to show you Ember CLI. So the documentation is pretty good for this. If you go to Ember CLI and you go to upgrade, it runs you through all the steps that you need to do. So I'm just going to run through these exact steps on this particular project. So the first thing that you do is you install the current version of the CLI that you have. So the version of the CLI, the version of Ember Data, and the version of Ember will be in lockstep going forward. I think that was always a really confusing thing in the past with Ember, is that it wasn't very clear that the command line interface version would create you the version of Ember that you expected, and the same thing with the data, that they all aligned, and now they do. So that's kind of a nice thing going forward. So this is going to remove my current CLI version. Okay. So it removes that. We'll do an npm. I'll just actually do this clear. So this cleans the node package module, just kind of cleans the cache for that. So you're cleaning that out. Same thing with Bower. So Ember, I didn't mention this, Ember uses both Bower and npm as package managers, which I found a little interesting and slightly weird, but I think they will eventually converge on npm, but there's a decent amount of reliance on Bower for things like jQuery and some front-end frameworks. All right, so we clear out Bower. So then what we want to do is install the version of the command line interface for the new version that we're going for. So for us, we were trying to go for the long-term support version of Ember, which is 2.4.3. So we're going to install that version of the CLI. If you didn't include that version number at the end, it would just default up to like the latest not data version that would take you to that version, which I think is actually like 2.5 or 6. we'll see how fast this goes. And then for background information, so we have internally here, which is actually really cool. It's the first place I've worked where we have an internal NPM repository. That's pretty great. Like I've never, other places I've worked, it always goes directly to NPM. We have an internal one that does mirroring. So if you, it's going to go and bring down the latest version, but if it doesn't need to, it's got it cached, and so it's a little bit faster. And this just also allows us to have like our own NPM private packages, which is pretty cool.
We avoided left pad.
We avoided left pad because of this. The big controversial dependency. So yeah, feel free to grab some food, grab some drinks while I'm here. It's there. It's very exciting, live demo right now. I debated on whether doing some of this live demo because I'm like, oh, we've all seen NPM install, maybe, and like it's kind of boring, but I'll take you through it.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Right as it stops. So for 3.0, they're moving from, like, they're moving away from controllers, and there's a lot, at least, yeah, there's a lot of data that sits in controllers that are specific to, that are not, like, component related. Like, what is the plan for that?
Like sort of stateful things
Right.
that maybe are not. So you can probably do two things. You can either move some of that into something that, like, if it is truly state that needs to be maintained in a long-term fashion, then it probably should be a service. If it like across multiple controllers needs some sort of state maintained,
Right.
but if it really is something that it's just some sort of additional pieces of information that you have in addition to your model, then maybe you could maybe move some of it into the model itself.
Okay.
So that's one way, and then obviously then if it was really truly component specific, then you just move that into the component.
Right. So that makes sense. But yeah, it's not. So I guess, yeah, that's where the like huge re-architecture comes in, because you're going to have to really rethink.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
The components.
All right. So we have a new version of the command line interface now, so it's at the version that we want. So now we have our existing applications. So as I showed you before, this is my Ember app that's at 1.13.13. So I'm going to navigate. I am in that particular directory right now, so you can see the structure there. First thing we're going to do is just remove the existing node modules and the Bower components. This distribution folder, which is a temporary thing that is created once you do your build. So when you do an Ember build and you say build my Ember app for production, it's going to put all those assets into this distribution folder. We're just going to blow that away. It's temporary. We don't need it. And then same thing for temp is used during like running your Ember app locally. So we're going to do that. Run all the things. So it's going to get rid of all those directories. And then install the CLI at the version that we want. In this save that thing, just make sure that it updates for this specific project. It's going to update the package.json configuration file to say that this is the version that we're running at. So we'll let that take its time.
Get a second drink.
Get a second piece of pizza. Any other questions so far? I know this isn't super deep yet for some of the existing Embers. I will get there. Trying to build it up.
Was Ember originally Sprout Core or Apple?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was, yeah. So Sprout Core is the original invocation of this entire framework. And yeah, it was an iteration of that. They renamed it and took it out into the community and upgraded it from there.
Built-in stuff to do with, is it Ember libraries that are doing like the testing in the desert, or are they just using what's out there now and have it
Oh, sure, yeah. So I have a slide like that shows all the different things that they depend on. I don't have it in this one, but so QUnit is like baked in testing framework. Phantom.js is used for kind of command line interface running of those particular unit tests. Build pipeline stuff. They're using Broccoli for a lot of the grunt or gulp-like build pipeline stuff, which under the covers is probably sharing things too, but that's kind of like the top level thing. So those are kind of the big ones. Test them. Another one for doing multi-browser testing of unit tests.
So fun fact is Angular 2 is starting to go down that road. For example, they've wrapped all the Jasmine testing library with Angular 2 components. So you really can't test Angular 2 without using Jasmine.
Interesting.
So they're pretty much JS.
Yeah. JS hints for linting. I'm assuming that will probably move towards ESLint, since like the JSCS and JS hint communities have kind of all started to go there. Yeah.
The singularity is
The
coming.
single page app, singularity.
frameworks. Embrace yourself 5 years.
And then the next thing will happen, and we'll have 4 years of new things to learn.
Paradigm will shift.
So now I'm just doing, so by clearing everything out, so all those directories were clear, so there was nothing in the node modules directory anymore, there was nothing in the power components directory. So essentially what we're doing is, we're saying, I want to upgrade my Ember app, and I want all the new things, so bring all those newer versions down. So I did that. Now we'll do a Bower install. This is my favorite thing, J.J. Abrams resolver. I was like, what is that? I haven't actually looked it up to see what it is. I'm like, what?
It's too deep for comprehension.
It's lost.
Yeah.
Alright. So we've got Bower now. This is the part that I was mentioning earlier. I'm gonna run this thing called Ember init. I'm doing it on my existing project because it's just a dummy app, and it's nice to see the wizard that it steps you through. But I would say, don't do this on your for real Ember app. Like maybe do it in a good dummy app, and then do some comparisons of the folder structures. But this is what it's going to look like if you really did it. If you did it against your existing Ember app. So it's going to lead you through this wizard. Like, do you want to overwrite this file? And I'm like, I don't know what that file is. I don't know. Should I overwrite it? So you can do D to do a diff on that, which is nice. So it's going to show you that it's removing these particular lines, it's adding these lines, so you can analyze what it's going to do. So I'm going to accept that. README, sure. Show me what the diff is with the README. They remove the www. So, yeah, I'll accept that as well. Overwrite app, let's see what the diff is on that. So for app, big diff here, you can see just like some small changes. Instead of referring to Ember, just run it out of the current context. So we'll accept that. So index.html, this is your kind of the bootstrap, right? Like the first thing that gets hit. What's different there? Single quotes versus double quotes, very important. I'm on board with this.
Approved.
Approved.
It's like where's though? What changed?
So Bower, now this is more important. Bower JSON and package JSON are basically the things that pull all the dependencies down to run your Ember app. So this is an important one to understand the differences from. So this one cleans up a lot of things from dependencies. So you can see our Ember version jumped. So we're at 2.4 now. We were at 1.13.11. Some other stuff bumped versions as well. Some other things were removed because they kind of move things around. So some stuff doesn't need to be dependencies anymore. This looks good. Package JSON, same thing. You can see here that now you can see the Ember CLI version bumped. You can see that Ember Data bumped. So here, Ember Data at 2.42. We're at 1.13, 15 before. So it's doing all this work for you, figuring out. So I guess the summary of this is that, like, when I was working with Backbone and I was managing package JSON by hand, I was determining, yes, I think we should use this newer version of jQuery. I'm going to manually update it and then make sure my app works. I'm going to manually upgrade this other version of a framework that I depend on and make sure that it works. With Ember, they're guaranteeing you that these various versions are going to work together at 2.4.3. So you don't have to kind of manually do all these things and piece it all together. So override that, we'll just keep overriding these things. So it's going to install these particular updates, which is cool. Have a 12th piece of pizza. All right, so now it's trying to, if there's a conflict here, and it's saying, like, we're trying to find a suitable version for Ember out on NPM, but we're finding multiple things. Which do you want? And I'm going to pick 2 because I want 2.4.3. So now it's all installed. So we use Git for version control. Source tree is a nice GUI sort of way to see all your changes. I could do this in the command line too, but for our purposes here, I thought this might be nice. So it's going to show you, here's all the files that have changed as part of this upgrade, and then you can inspect each one. So this is, again, this is like what I was doing with the wizard and doing D to show me the diffs. This is showing you those as well. So you can be extra certain of what you're committing to in your project. All right. So there's the physical act of running the upgrade. But that's not all. There were a lot of code changes as well. So these upgrades included not only updated packaging, but also like syntactical changes or deprecations of things. So I mentioned earlier you get like warnings ahead of time that something's going to be deprecated. So when you're running your app in the browser, it's going to detect that you're using something that might be deprecated. It gives you a warning message similar to that. And sometimes helpful links that take you off to a page that might help you figure out how to address that deprecation, how you would change your app to handle it. And then they document a lot of these deprecations on their website under each version. So there's a version 1, which they kind of list all the deprecations, and then same thing with version 2. So the first thing that we had to do for 1.10 to 1.13, which is a really big architectural shift, was to remove all Ember views and turn them all into components.
Doesn't help you do that.
It does not help you do that. There's no like automated thing you can run against your code base to like flip them. And part of that, I think, is because of the nature of components being very scoped and isolated versus views being very open. And I'll actually show you kind of what that looks like. There is, and I talk about it a little bit later, there is some helper tools that do automatically run through your code and update some tactical things. Things that are just like minutia, kind of tedious things that will help you with that. One thing that is nice as well is that, like, let's say you want to remove all your views and change everything to components, and that's totally cool, but you still have add-ons that you've put together in your app that still depend on views, but that add-on maintainer hasn't updated their add-on yet. Then you get into that like limbo state where you're like, well, I want to upgrade, but like this add-on I depend on hasn't updated. You can still move forward because you can add things like Ember legacy views into your app where it will help support that stuff until like the add-on community updates their things. Which for us hasn't been a problem. We haven't had to do that yet. All right, so components are isolated and scoped. Actions aren't automatically bubbled up. So for us, this was actually a really major refactor to try and make sure that we're adding all this scoping, but our app had depended upon things not being scoped. So we had to kind of make sure that all that stuff bubbled out of a component in the template with this interaction equals outer action thing. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So for us, I guess the biggest example was that we had sort of a data grid. So we had a lot like table data kind of stuff where we had a table view, we had a row view, we had a cell view. And in the footer, cell view specifically, was our paginator, so we could go back and forth between records. When you clicked on next page, that triggered an Ember action, and then that action was listened to and responded to up in a page level controller. So there's nothing like in between all these views that was passing that along. So the code for that was fairly clean, but it probably wasn't a good practice. I mean, we're not componentizing our stuff. It was a little bit of a code style, but it worked. But however, when we had to get rid of our views and componentize everything, then we had to make sure that we explicitly bubbled that action over and over. So I'm going to show you a crazy slide that I drew. It illustrates this bubbling. So for each like component, so we turned the cell view into a cell component, and that cell component had an HTML template, and also had associated JavaScript with it. Same thing with the row, same thing with the table, and eventually like at a page level. So that action, when we click that button to say go to the next page, we had to map it in that cell component to say listen for that action and then send it out as next action. And then for that row component, so this was a cell component inside of a row component, we had to bubble it out again, so we had to keep mapping it and mapping it and mapping it. This is pretty gross, but it didn't require us to re-architect the entire grid component system, which is actually there's a lot of complicated code in there. Maybe overcomplicated, but this mapping was key to getting that to work. So interaction equals outer action, that was kind of big learning from that to be able to make sure that these things bubble appropriately. And then there was a whole bunch of other changes within these versions for like removing array controllers with regular controllers, like replacing those things. And there's some pretty good documentation on it. That actually wasn't too troublesome. We didn't have a lot of rewriting that we had to do when we moved those things. The sortable mix-in was kind of a bigger deal. We were using that quite a bit with array controllers to be able to sort stuff. This is actually from newer documentation. This documentation did not exist at the time that we went from 10 to 13 because we struggled with that, and we actually left the sortable mix-in in as part of that upgrade. This is recent documentation that gave you a better idea of if I still want to do sorting of array-like things, how do I do that? And they give you some good documentation now, which is cool. So part of that, I think, is that the documentation has been getting better. At the Ember conference this year, they announced that they were expanding and dedicating teams to documentation, and also like changing the pattern of like, if you introduce a new feature, you can't just introduce it, you also have to have like associated docs. Because I think the community was kind of like, there's docs for like various versions, but not all the versions, and I'm confused, so they listened to that, which is cool. This is kind of a minor thing, but remove my adder. So it's just a little bit messier of syntax in order to do dynamic things, like if you wanted to have a class be stamped on a HTML element based on a state of something, like whether something was true or false. It's kind of gross, and that's gotten cleaner. So now it just reads a little bit more like HTML, which is cool. A little nicer. But that kind of change those are like the annoying changes. And there's some even more annoying ones where it's just tedious. You have to go through like all of your code base and start, swapping that stuff out. So Ember Watson was pretty nice. We used that. The biggest one was for converting computed properties and observers to not use prototype extensions. And so what I mean by that is like, let's say you had a property called isAvailable, and it was a computed property based on current precedence. This is what the old code looked like, and the new code it's just a syntactical change, like Ember.computed, current precedence, and then do things. But to have to do that across your entire code base is like, this is so much work. What's my benefit? So it was nice to have like Watson do that for you. Like you ran Watson, and it was pretty accurate. Like I don't think we ran it and we had to back out anything that it did. It was pretty clean, which was cool. So we did it for observers. We did it for computed properties as well. And that worked nice. And they're actually continuing to update Watson. So like as versions change, and if there are these kind of like fairly syntactical things that don't require you to like re-architect or rethink something, it's part of Watson, which is cool. All right, I have 1 minute left. Let's see how fast I can go. Ember Data. So this part of the upgrade, we have, so our RESTful API is written in Python, and it's using TastyPy, which is a web service API framework for Django. The Ember Data default is not for that format at all. It doesn't follow those same conventions. So the things that our API the structure that the API wants to send back to us is not something Ember knows how to handle out of the box. So we've had to do a decent amount of work with the adapters and the serializers to remap that data, or to remap those URL structures to work well with Ember. But thankfully, we're not the only people in the industry that work with TastyPy, so there was a community contribution to that. So I think that was like the basis for it, and then there were some tweaks made to make it 100% work. But that did make me nervous when I saw like how much work was being done in the adapter and the serializer to manipulate the data structure and the URL mappings. Made me nervous for like upgrading, because I was like, oh, are we going to be able to upgrade this fairly easily? And it wasn't too bad. There were some things that had to change, but we worked through those. A lot of it was like, this again was just syntactic stuff, like sample find methods. There was a more consistent API, so we just had to go through our code base and swap things over. API naming changes, so things like this, rollback, change to rollback attributes. You just have to go through your whole code base and update those.
That feels like something Ember Watson.
I know this feels like a Watson thing. This was not part of Watson, but it should have been a Watson. Maybe I should have done I did a pull request and made it smarter. So the REST adapter, so Ajax options is something that we had to override and set traditional to true. There's Ember out of the box wanted to put brackets for like array-like parameters. We needed to not do that. So that was something that had to be overridden. This is when you get into like danger zone for framework upgrades, because if you're overriding methods from the framework, then you have to be really careful that the upgrade doesn't break that. So we also had to override handle response and normalize error response to that errors that come back from the APIs, because they expected it to be in a certain format, and our format wasn't quite that. So as an example, if you were to do like model.save, and let's say the API responds with an error, something happens, 500, HTTP 500, it should fall into this reason function and give you some failure information. But for us, it wasn't, because we had to map it differently. So we had to override that stuff. So the REST serializer, we have things that like help convert a Django TCP URI into an ID. Ember Data relies heavily on IDs, connecting all the things together. Our endpoints, instead of IDs, give us URIs. So whether that's a URI for the resource itself or a URI for the relationship model, it's always a URI, so we have to map that differently. This one right here was for sure an upgrade thing that we hit, where normalized ID was something that we're overriding, and that disappeared out of 2.0. So like inherently, like a lot of our stuff broke, and we had to remove a call to super. It was a very simple fix, but because we're doing overrides of native framework stuff, that was something that we hit. Let's skip that. Model helpers. Let's skip through this as well. I mean, the summary of the slide is we have complicated data relationships. We have like has many relationships to many other types of models, or belongs to relationships to many different types of models. And out of the box, Ember Data does not make it very easy for you to roll back things, meaning like you have a web page, the user does a bunch of things, they click a bunch of buttons, they change the state of that model, but then they don't save, because you're like, you give them the opportunity to like save or not save. Let's say they hit cancel and you want to roll all that stuff that they just did back. This is where we had to do a lot of overrides with the model helpers to make sure that not only we rolled back the model, but we rolled back all of its relationships. And that was kind of a complicated piece with that. 2.0, so Ember Data 2.0, the adapter and serializer, they start moving very heavily towards JSON API, which is a standard that I want to say Yehuda is basically the champion of, tried to push this forward as a standard format for RESTful APIs. This is how your structure of your payloads should look, as a way to standardize on that. And because there isn't really standards. I mean, there's best practices and patterns, but nothing official. So they push this forward, but the thing is, not a lot of the community, not a lot of existing platform stuff from server side to build APIs does this by default. So we opt out of it because we can't take advantage of it, which is fine. They give you the option to opt out. I mean, the good thing is that they're pushing for it, but they're not forcing you, so you can easily opt out. All right, so struggles. Services work, I think I mentioned that. That was not really our experience, so that's cool. Versions should be the same, I mentioned it as well. And documentation is better, so that's also something I mentioned. Ember community's been really nice, so that's something that's really important to me, to be able to ask a question and not get flamed and told that you're being stupid. Like, that's really nice. So the Ember community so far for me, I posted stuff on GitHub, I posted things in the Ember Slack, and everyone's been like really helpful and really nice. I like that.
Yes.
Some other random recommendations, so this is kind of outside the scope of upgrade, but just other recommendations that have made our lives easier working with Ember has been use of liquid fire for promise-based animations. That's something that has like caused a lot of struggle with unit testing. So if you want to have a very robust acceptance test suite, with acceptance tests, it's running your entire app, and it's running your entire, it's doing stuff to the DOM. And if you use things like Bootstrap, which is something that we were using for modals, to like animate the modal in, animate the modal out, because it wasn't using promises and because it wasn't kind of something that Ember's run loop was aware of, your entire acceptance suite would fail, which is very, very tricky to figure out, and John spent a lot of time working through figuring some of that out. So when we moved to Liquid Fire, that was huge, because now it's promise-based, those animations, and it fits nicely into the Ember run loop, so it cleans itself up very, very nicely after each acceptance test runs. So that was pretty big. Content modal, this is minutia, but there was a lot of use of the word content to refer to models, but I was like, should we just refer to it as models? I was confused about that. And I found a thread where you just said models, and I was like, yes, okay, I understand this now. So we did some changes there. That's a little tiny thing. All right, so looking ahead, routable components, so that allows us to remove controllers, angle bracket components for true one-way data flow. That's a big move that kind of goes back to that idea of standards organizations, and like if components are going to be, web components are standards, or a standard that we want to move to, then same thing with the components, let those kind of fall in line with that. Fast food applications. So that's an example of what that would look like. So at the moment, all of our components look like this, and we're going to have to move eventually to the angle bracket, which there may be implications there, because we may not be doing true data down, actions up in all of our code, so that could have some impact. But you're not required to do that yet, so we have time. And then these are just some general resources. So I'll post this slide deck out so you guys can get some links and such. And that is all I have. Only 9 minutes over, sorry. Any questions or general
Can we go back
topics?
to like 3 slides? I don't know how many.
Three
So like they're right before that.
This guy?
No, one more.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to look at it for a minute.
Yeah, there's a lot. So like I definitely overpack my slides with a lot of text, but I hope that's helpful, because if I post this afterwards, then it's not like a bunch of memes with no context. So hopefully it's helpful.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Stacy, you did a lot of work with Backbone before Ember, and Backbone is configuration over convention, I would say, and then Ember is more convention over configuration. Do you have a preference? Do you prefer one over the other? Is there like a blend that would be better, or what? Like, I guess what are your opinions on some of that? Because that's been my hardest thing with Ember is trying to do something that I think should be simple, but they really don't want you to do it, so you really can't do it, or you make a mess.
Yeah. So it's situational where I find the pros and the cons. So situational being like having worked on a super big developer team and having some so this is like background days, having that developer team be very mixed in their skill sets and their comfort level building single page web applications. it was so hard to try and make sure that everyone was like creating new backbone views or like creating things in a structure that was consistent and similar and architecturally felt the same. So for that aspect, Ember seems nice because those are not conversations that you have to have, and it breaks if you don't do it right. So that can be nice, but that's not like in a different team with different skill sets. It's a different story because like with this, like our team, like I don't feel like we would have that issue because everyone writes really clean, good code, and they like are crafts people, and they like appreciate good code, and so like that wouldn't be the same story, and that doesn't become like a pro or a con anymore. I do find the test framework stuff, it's really irritating to me. Like with Backbone, it was very easy to put Jasmine in there and sign on or however you say it, and wired up a Phantom and test them, and like all that was like pretty easy to do without much issue. And it seems like it's been it has been a huge struggle with Ember for us to be able to do that. Part of it, I think, is the convention over configuration means people are going to read your documentation and follow it really closely. So I think the original group of people that created these Ember apps, they read the documentation. The documentation said, use HTTP mocks for dev time and test time. So if you read the docs and you follow what Ember was telling you to do, you implemented it like that, and it worked okay, like it got you places, and then you hit a wall, and now like it's moving, and people are like, Mirage will help you with this, but you're like, but the docs said this, and like that's that struggle. So I feel like their testing situation, I think, could be much more. I don't see a lot of like really good, I don't know if you've seen this, Brian, like good talks about how to really get super robust unit testing set up for like a complex Ember app, but I haven't come across it.
It's a very light greenfield stuff, so it doesn't hold up well once you get more complex
Yeah.
things to test.
Yeah. So I feel like that story it's pretty new and not well told. So pros and cons. I don't know if it's a super in-depth answer, but
I mean, I think I like the convention for working on a team. I think it is important because it does make it easy to kind of share code.
yeah.
Part of me just wishes they would let you like configure some things, but, or more things. I guess,
Yeah.
but, and most of the time, I do find that I can find the right I can work with the conventions to get most everything done. So that's cool. It was a different paradigm because I did some backbone stuff beforehand too.
Yeah.
So it took a while to get used to it, but I actually kind of like it, and I think it is pushing me in the right direction for kind of how all the frameworks are going anyway. So
Yeah, like when I created, so like on our team, I created some tickets in our backlog to do this work to like really make our Ember testing situation more robust, like more unit test coverage, more coverage overall. Let's hook all this stuff in. But I did it from my backbone head, and I was like, oh, it shouldn't take too long at all. We can just hook in all these things, and it'll just work nice. And it's been much more complicated than that.
As always.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.